Hello, and welcome to another episode of Out of Context. Excuse me. It's going to be a long night, everybody. I'm just going to tell you now. So as usual, I'm going to read to you from a book. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I've already been drinking at the suggestion of somebody, so it's going to be fun. We're going to have fun. We'll do the usual. I had to break into a new one of these. That's actually how much I drank. It's fine. I'm good for it. Yeah. There's that. I'll close that. I got a big thing of ginger ale. I don't know why. I just do. I just spilled some on myself. It's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be great. Okay. So, without any further ado, that's a weird word. Without any further ado, let's get started. In the spring of 1974, a most unusual meeting took place. Two physicists, Fred Alan Wolf and Jack Sarfati, we're going to go with Sarfati, who would soon become charter members of the Fundamental Physics Group, and note that is spelled with an F, F-Y-S-I-K-S. Some sort of weird rebellion. Charter members of the Fundamental Physics Group sat down with Werner Erhard, probably Werner Erhard, in the lobby of the Ritz Hotel in Paris. Erhard, one of the leading exponents of the human potential movement, was at the top of his game. His EST workshops, EST workshops, Erhard seminars, trainings. There we go, now we have an explanation. Forerunner of today's self-help and personal growth industry, had already grossed several $1 million and boosted Erhard to worldwide celebrity. So this is the dude that's responsible for all that shit. He had asked Wolf and Sarfati? I actually already forget what I said I was going to pronounce it as. He had asked Wolf and Sarfati to meet with him because he was fascinated by the way physicists attacked complicated and counterintuitive problems with rigor. The meeting did not get off to an auspicious start. Sarfati, we're going to go with that, Sarfati, felt restless, uninterested in the meeting. He had never heard of Erhard. Erhard's gaudy outfit, accessorized by a beautiful female admirer hanging on his sleeve, put Sarfati off even more. Sarfati asked what Erhard did. Erhard grinned and replied, "I make people happy." That's weird. It was more than Sarfati could take. Itching to leave, he said in a strong Brooklyn accent, "I think you're an asshole." As Sarfati remembers it, Erhard rose from his chair, smile stretching from ear to ear, embraced Sarfati right there in the hotel lobby and said, "I am going to give you money." Oh shit, I gotta try that. Without knowing it, Sarfati had used one of the catchphrases associated with Erhard's sprawling self-help venture. Soon, the money began to flow. Thousands of dollars, all from this most eager new patron of quantum physics. Erhard was not the first to seek enlightenment from the strange subject of quantum theory. Even more than relativity, with its talk of shrinking meter sticks, slowing clocks, and twins who age at different rates, quantum mechanics is a science of the bizarre. Particles tunnel through walls. Cats become trapped, half dead and half alive. Objects separated light years apart retain telepathic links with one another. The seeming solidity of the world evaporates into a cloud of likelihoods. Long before Erhard, Wolf, and Sarfati had arrived on the scene, the world's leading physicists had struggled to come to grips with quantum theory, yes, to tease out just what it might mean. Many of their ideas sounded no less peculiar than the half-formed inklings that inspired Erhard on that fateful spring day. Quantum mechanics emerged over the first quarter of the 20th century, honed primarily by Europeans working in the leading centers of theoretical physics: Göttingen, Munich, Copenhagen, Cambridge. Most of its creators, towering figures like Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and Erwin Schrödinger, famously argued that quantum mechanics was first and foremost a new way of thinking. Ideas that had guided scientists for centuries were to be cast aside. Bohr constantly spoke of the general epistemological lesson of the new quantum era. I actually don't know what that word means. Epistemological. We're going to go with that. The disjuncture of cause and effect, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, wave-particle duality, all required explicit, extended philosophical engagement. So these leaders This is good. It's a good start. I'm like less than a full page in. All these required explicit, extended philosophical engagement, so these leaders proclaimed. They differed, often passionately, over which philosophical schools of thought might best clarify the new material. Some invoked the writings of 18th century scholar Immanuel Kant. Kant. We're going to go with Kant for that. Otherwise, I'm going to giggle every time. Hi, Chikachats. Others quoted aphorisms from Hindu holy scriptures or Upanishads. I don't know that word either. Some even dabbed in Jungian depth psychology. The subject's leading detractors, such as Albert Einstein, likewise agreed that quantum mechanics had to meet stringent philosophical tests. Mathematical self-consistency and agreement with experiments were important, but hardly sufficient. During this heady period, grown men argued into the night, trying to make sense of a series of puzzles and paradoxes. Names were called, tears were shed. At one point, an ailing Schrödinger sought refuge in bed while visiting Bohr's Institute for Theoretical Physics in Copenhagen. Unable to let a disputed matter of interpretation rest, Bohr hounded the poor Austrian at his bedside, repeating, "But surely, Schrödinger, you must see." That style of working on quantum mechanics faded fast after World War II, especially in the United States. The war and its aftermath shaped how generations of new physicists were trained. Ultimately, the war changed what it meant to be a physicist. The Cold War completed the transformation, winnowing the range of acceptable topics and admissible approaches. Very quickly, philosophical inquiry or open-ended speculation of the kind that Bohr, Einstein, Heisenberg, and Schrödinger had considered a prerequisite for serious work on quantum theory got shunted aside. Shut up and calculate became the new rallying cry. Yet the Cold War consensus proved to be no more eternal than the pre-war style had been. As the fortunes of physics plummeted in the late 1960s and early 1970s, sending academic physics departments into a tailspin, new intellectual possibilities opened up. I'm going to call that a messed up one. Why not? Buoyed by cash from new patrons like Erhard, small clusters of physicists, including Wolf, Sarfati, and their colleagues in the fundamental physics group, labored to carve out a new identity for themselves and for the science they loved so much. We've made it 16 minutes. That's good. Back in the 1920s, sticking points seemed to abound in the new quantum theory. Every time physicists tried to make sense of their hard-won equations, new and bizarre challenges tumbled forth. I did just want to drink I did. You know what? I'm just going to call you Paula because I don't feel like saying Chica Shots. It's weird to me. It's weird to me. It just is. One experiment captured the lion's share of peculiarities. It came to be known as the double slit experiment. Champions of quantum mechanics trotted it out time and again to sharpen their understanding of the issues involved. Bohr and Heisenberg, for example, featured it in some of their earliest expositions of quantum mechanics. Critics likewise saw much of value in the experiment, goading their colleagues to admit how preposterous their explanation sounded. Schrödinger, caught between the warring camps with his own uneasy relationship to the equations he had produced, recognized the pedagogical value of the double-slit experiment for clarifying many of the core mysteries of quantum mechanics, and featured it prominently in lectures during the 1930s. Since that time, generations of physicists have followed Schrödinger's lead. In fact, readers of the trade magazine Physics World recently voted the double-slit experiment as the single most beautiful experiment of all time. In their view, it edged out heavyweight contenders from Galileo to Newton, and even a classic dating from ancient Alexandria, all of which also made the top 10. In an essay for Einstein's 70th birthday, published in the late 1940s, Bohr used the double-slit experiment as the leitmotif of his decades-long debate with Einstein. Years earlier, Einstein had helped to launch the quantum revolution, introducing several crucial concepts. In fact, the Nobel Prize Committee cited only his contributions to quantum theory when granting his award in 1921, remaining mum on relativity. No, I don't care. Then, in one of the delicious ironies of the history of science, Einstein reversed course and turned his back on his own creation. Went into it anyway. The irony was not lost on Einstein. After all, he wrote to Schrödinger, many a young whore turns into an old praying sister, and many a young revolutionary becomes an old reactionary. Einstein said some serious shit. He brandished the double-split experiment in private correspondence to drive home his criticisms as early as April 1926, and in more public settings the following year. Fearing that their friendly squabbles over quantum theory had become too ethereal or detached from the real world over the years, Bohr worked with an artist to make his position more concrete when preparing his essay for Einstein's birthday. The resulting images had the look and feel of engineering diagrams, all bulky bolts and heavy planks. In Bohr's reconstruction, the double-slit experiment centered around an apparatus like the one in Figure 1-1, a thick wall with two slits hollowed out. Let's see if I can get this onto the camera there. It's a little blurry. Oh, there it goes. Good camera. Doing the job. I need a drink. A sliding latch. I'm getting all the drink like on my, what is this called? Mustache. I'm getting it all on the mustache. It's actually bothering me. A sliding latch was installed in front of one of the slits so that physicists could choose whether to leave that slit open or shut. Behind the wall stood a recording screen. It could be photographic film or some other means of detection bolted securely in place. Einstein and Bohr each knew well what would happen if they shined a light on the wall when both slits were open. Bohr included a picture in his birthday essay. Figure 1-2. Oh. Look at the other one. Look at that. Yeah. Dispersion, interference, whatever you want to call it. If the light source were far enough away, the light waves would approach the wall with slits in a simple configuration that physicists call a plane wave, with all the crests and troughs lined up neatly in rows. Most of the light from the source would be blocked by the wall. The light that passed through the narrow slits would fan out in a new pattern. arcing in semicircular waves toward the recording screen. The crests and troughs of the two curving light waves emanating from the open slits would no longer be lined up with each other. In some locations along the recording screen, the crest from one wave would arrive in step with the crest from the other, adding up to make a bright spot on the photographic film. In other locations, however, the crest from one wave would arrive with the trough of the other. At those spots, the light waves from each slit would cancel each other out, leaving no mark on the film. And so it would go as one moved down the recording screen, alternating light and dark bands known as interference pattern. As an interference pattern. Bohr pressed on. One of the biggest surprises in quantum physics was that the same quintessential interference pattern arose when one fired tiny particles, such as electrons, at a wall with two slits. Each particle seemed to behave like a tiny billiard ball when released from the source on one side of the room and detected at the screen on the other side. Yet upon shooting tens, hundreds, or thousands of electrons at the twice-slitted wall, the locations at which each tiny electron was detected matched the wave-like interference pattern. That would never happen with ordinary billiard balls. When thrown at a wall with two slits, the balls would cluster in two clumps, one behind each of the open slits. The billiard balls would never arrange themselves in the alternating interference pattern. Even more strange, physicists could choose to shoot 1,000 electrons at the wall one at a time, an hour apart. After all the electrons had made their way through the apparatus, the pattern of light and dark patches on the recording screen, marking where each individual electron had arrived one at a time, would appear just as if physicists had sent light waves to interfere. And that's this figure. A lot of figures here. Okay. Physicists had managed to conduct laboratory demonstrations of the effect as early as 1927. Einstein pressed his colleagues at an informal conference that year to explain. What did the waving? Certainly not the electrons themselves, at least not without straining credulity. Each had been fired one at a time, so no two electrons could have interacted with each other, say by repelling each other with their electric charge. Each had been detected as a tiny particle. None showed up at the recording screen as a washed-out wave. This distance between the slits was much larger than the electrons themselves, so it hardly made sense to think that an electron passed through both slits at the same time and interfered with itself on the other side. Einstein clearly enjoyed watching his colleagues squirm. I feel like I would have enjoyed seeing Einstein screw with his friends. Like two giddy schoolboys, Einstein and a close friend passed notes back and forth while one defender of quantum theory after another tried to fend off Einstein's challenges. "Don't laugh," his friend scribbled. Einstein's prescient reply, "I laugh only at the naivety of the proponents of quantum theory. Who knows who will be laughing in the coming years?" Mm-hmm. Einstein's sparring partners were laughing soon enough. See? Bohr, Heisenberg, and their colleagues cobbled together an interpretation of what was happening in the double-slit experiment. Every quantum system, they reasoned, had an associated wave function, which they labeled with the Greek letter psi. The values that the wave function assumed in different locations and the way those values changed over time were governed by a new equation first introduced by Schrödinger in 1926. Schrödinger's equation was similar in mathematical form to well-known equations that described wave behavior, such as water waves on the ocean. Max Born, Einstein's friend and Heisenberg's mentor, advanced an interpretation that same year that psi was related to probability. In particular, the probability for detecting a quantum object at a particular time and place was given, in Born's account, by the absolute square of the associated wave function. Whatever. In the double-slit experiment, according to this interpretation, the electron's wave functions spread out like a wave and went through both slits, leading to the characteristic interference pattern. This is a lot of shit. I'm just going to be honest with you. So were the electrons behaving like particles or waves? The answer, which brought a smile to Niels Bohr's face every time he walked a new audience through the experiment, was all of the above. Einstein was less amused. The Heisenberg-Bohr tranquilizing philosophy or religion is so delicately contrived, he complained in a letter to Schrödinger in May 1928, that for the time being it provides a gentle pillow for the true believer from which he cannot very easily be aroused. So let him lie there, but, he left no doubt, this religion has so damned little effect on me. So basically, Einstein wasn't buying the shit. He was not down with what they were saying at all. Everyone is behaving, Paula. I think it's because we scared away the spammers. I honestly do. Because that night that we had like 13 or 15 people, it was mostly spammers. I'm not mad. It's just what happened. Heisenberg and Bohr had more tricks up their sleeves. They weren't finished with the double slit yet. They considered modifying the apparatus to be able to measure through which slit an individual electron passed. Despite all the talk of wave functions, after all, each electron was emitted and detected like a tiny particle. Surely each electron must have passed through one slit or the other, just like ordinary billiard balls would do. That notion could be tested, they explained, by placing some other tiny particles behind one of the slits. If an electron passed through that slit en route to the recording screen, then some of the test particles would get scattered, like pins tossed about by a bowling ball, signaling the electron's passage through the slit. If, on the other hand, none of the test particles were scattered, then the electron must have passed through the other slit. It sounded simple enough, and it would have worked too, but for one catch, known as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Soon after Schrödinger and Born worked out the basic rules for manipulating psi, Heisenberg demonstrated that the new equations behaved in some unexpected ways, totally unlike the usual physics of particles or waves. Certain pairs of quantities, such as position and momentum or energy and time, could never be specified with unlimited precision at a single instant. The more precisely a quantum object's position was specified, the less precisely its momentum could be, and vice versa. I was just going to explain, but I actually read ahead because I'm noticing there's a pattern here. I think I need to say something, and then the book says it anyway. According to Heisenberg, in other words, we can never know exactly where an object is and where it is going at the same time. That is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Just, without the fancy words. During lectures at the University of Chicago in 1929, in one of his earliest deployments of the uncertainty principle, Heisenberg demonstrated why the slit detector could not work as advertised. To yield a reliable measurement of whether an electron passed through a particular slit, the test particles would have to be clumped tightly behind that slit. The uncertainty in their position, in other words, would have to be much smaller than the distance between the two slits. That small uncertainty in position, in turn, would correspond to a large uncertainty in their momentum. The incoming electron thus would careen into a collection of test particles that already had some large uncertainty in their momentum. This would translate into a correspondingly large uncertainty in the electron's momentum following the collision. Heisenberg needed just a few lines of algebra to show that the collision would jostle the electron's path just enough to smear out the sharp peaks and valleys of the interference pattern. In fact, if every electron could be measured to pass through one slit or the other, the resulting detection pattern would revert to two broad peaks, one behind each slit, all wave-like interference would vanish. On the other hand, reducing the uncertainty of the electron's momentum after scattering to retain the interference pattern could only be done by increasing the uncertainty of the test particle's position by such an amount that no one would know whether they had been clumped behind one slit, the other, or both. To Bohr, the paradox of the slit detector exemplified a more general feature of quantum mechanics. Ask a particle-like question, through which slit did the particle pass, and you'll receive a particle-like answer, slit A or slit B. Ask a wave-like question, how does psi? I think it's psi. Yeah, it's psi. How does psi behave in the region between the slits and the detectors? And you will always receive a wave-like response in a state interference, crest-canceling troughs in some places and amplifying crests in others. Bohr coined the term complementarity for his emerging philosophy. Explanation on the quantum oh my god. Explanation in the quantum realm, he maintained, required the constant juxtaposition of statements that were themselves mutually exclusive, the particle yin always paired with the wave-like yang. In 1947, when the King of Denmark anointed Bohr with the prestigious Order of the Elephant, Bohr needed to produce a family coat of arms for display in the Frederiksborg Castle near Copenhagen. He placed the classical Chinese yin-yang symbol at its center. Einstein had little patience for this kind of talk. The goal of physics, he maintained his entire life, was to determine how the world works on its own, independent of the questions we happen to ask of it. Writing to Schrödinger, Einstein mocked Bohr's increasingly oracular outbursts as those of a ridiculous little Talmudic philosopher. I don't know why, but I believe that to be a bit of an insult. Talmud. That's not ringing any bells. Does anyone know what Talmud is? Or why it's an insult? I don't know. Einstein had other bones to pick. Max Born had suggested, and nearly all quantum physicists came to agree, that the square of the wave function yielded a probability, but neither Born nor anyone else had succeeded in pressing beyond mere probabilities. For Einstein, this seemed an intolerable shortcoming. He made a few false starts of his own, at one point jotting a rush note to Born to announce that he had found an interpretation of psi that did not resort to probabilities, but each of these efforts fell short of the mark. In the meantime, Einstein only accorded quantum mechanics what he called transitory significance, despite his many contributions to the subject. Holy shit. How long is this oh my god. I'm not reading this whole chapter. This is ridiculous. This is why I was drinking. I didn't want to say it beforehand because it's supposed to be out of context, but honest to God, this is a difficult book to read. This was more difficult to read than Einstein's biography. And I think Einstein's biography had more information in it. This is just... I don't have the vocabulary. I don't know what word I want to describe what this book is. Now I lost where I was. Got it. I still believe in the possibility of giving a model of reality, he explained in a lecture at Oxford in 1933. A theory, that is to say, which shall represent events themselves and not merely the probability of their occurrence. Writing to Born, he was even more direct. Quantum mechanics is certainly imposing, he began. But an inner voice tells me that it is not yet the real thing. The theory says a lot, but does not really bring us any closer to the secret of the old one. I don't know what that means. Is that like Cthulhu or whatever it's called? Like the old one with the... It's like an octopus, but not. I don't know. That's what I thought the old one was. I, at any rate, am convinced that he is not playing at dice. I'm assuming that means God. Einstein had no beef with the logical self-consistency or the empirical successes of quantum mechanics. In the right hands, he acknowledged, Schrödinger's equation and Born's interpretation of psi could produce stunningly accurate descriptions of the overall outcomes of large collections of events, such as where, on average, thousands of electrons that had been fired at a barrier would be detected. But the quantum formalism could never reconstruct those aggregate results on a case-by-case basis. It could never explain why the electron in experimental run 867 happened to pass through one slit rather than the other and wind up at a particular location. This is rough. Einstein's frustrations. Einstein's frustrations reached the boiling point in the summer of 1935. He exchanged a series of letters that summer with Erwin Schrödinger? Wait, was that his name this whole time? Erwin? I totally missed that. Or I've forgotten it. Who knows? He exchanged a series of letters that summer with Erwin Schrödinger, each egging the other on with his discontent over the direction quantum physics had taken. Building on suggestions from Einstein, Schrödinger crystallized their position with a thought experiment that came to be known as Schrödinger's cat. Hey. In what he called a ludicrous example, Schrödinger pushed the problem of only being able to calculate probabilities to the extreme. Imagine a cat. Sorry, that was a bad time to pause. Imagine a cat, Schrödinger instructed readers of his resulting article, enclosed in a steel chamber together with the following infernal machine. A small source of radioactive material next to a Geiger counter, which would be able to detect any radioactive decays. I think that one's done. Hold on just one moment here. I'm going to refill my drink. It's fine. I'm an adult. New drink. Put the caps on these so that I don't spill this all over my computer, because that would be heartbreaking. Whew. Okay, where's the cat? Here we go. Rigged up to the Geiger counter would be a hammer. Should the Geiger counter detect even a single radioactive decay, it would release the hammer, which would strike a bottle of poison, killing the cat. Suppose, Schrödinger continued, that the radioactive material had a probability of 1/2 to decay within an hour. The best that quantum mechanics could say was that after 1 hour had elapsed, the cat locked inside the box would be in the strangest of conditions. In equal measure, the living and the dead cat are, sit venia verbo, pardon the expression, blended or smeared out. Neither dead nor alive, the cat would be in some weird quantum mixture of half dead and half alive, a condition with no analog in ordinary experience. But, Schrödinger and Einstein emphasize, no one had ever seen a cat in such a horrid state. Surely, they were convinced there must be more to physics than mere probabilities. Bohr, in contrast, delighted in the new probabilistic framework, reaching back to his undergraduate studies of Kant said it. That's probably the right way to say it. It just makes me want to laugh. Kant and Kierkegaard to craft a new quantum world view. Heisenberg, too, found ample fodder for philosophizing in the turn to probabilities. That's great. The son of a classicist, Heisenberg enlisted ancient concepts of being and becoming, or potentia, from the likes of Plato and Aristotle. Puzzling through the uncertainty principle, he liked to recall later in life, had sent him scrambling for his copy of Plato's Timaeus to Heisenberg's close friend and collaborator Wolfgang Pauli. Such claims smacked of mere posturing. Pauli declared in a letter to Bohr that Heisenberg was in fact very unphilosophical. Indeed, Bohr, Heisenberg, Pauli, and their colleagues like Max Born became convinced that their new quantum theory ushered in an entirely new philosophical age. Bohr announced at every opportunity that his either-or interpretation of the quantum realm, complementarity, was a general, there's that fucking word again, epistemological lesson to be applied liberally across the entire gamut of human learning, from biology and psychology to anthropology. Typical example. According to Bohr, we can either experience the free flow of our own thoughts or observe ourselves in the process of thinking, but not both at the same time. Soon after the onset of the Cold War, Max Born was moved to liken capitalism and communism, because that's how you pronounce that. Communism to particle and wave, destined for a quantum-like complementarity. Ooh. Capitalism and communism. Particle and wave. That's actually interesting. So he's basically saying that capitalism and communism are... You can't figure out which it is until you... No, you know what? I shouldn't try to interpret things right now. It's a bad idea. I've been drinking for too long. Einstein would have none of it. I fucking hate this word. This epistemology... Oh, actually wasn't bad. Epistemology-soaked orgy ought to come to an end. Damn. He wrote to a colleague at one point. Setting aside the wider speculations in which the quantum theorists indulged so freely, traipsing from natural sciences to social sciences, religion, politics, and beyond, Einstein still harbored deep reservations about their interpretation of the physics. Their embrace of probabilities was especially troubling. Such a probabilistic description might well be useful, Einstein granted, but it was hardly fundamental. My own opinion, he confided to a correspondent in late 1939, nearly 15 years after the breakthroughs by Heisenberg, Schrödinger, Bohr, and Born, was that we will return to the task to describe real phenomena. Oh, that's just a weird spelling of phenomena. In space and time, not only probabilities for possible experiment. By that time, most of the younger generation had stopped worrying about Einstein's quibbles. Yet others, closer in age to Einstein, such as Schrödinger, came to share Einstein's dissatisfaction with quantum mechanics. All agreed that mysteries like the double-slit experiment demanded serious philosophical attention. The fate of physics depended on it. Okay, so that's a break. I'm going to stop here. Here's a problem. Just maybe like a week ago, Paula had actually asked me how I managed to pick a good section of every book to kind of give the feel of what the book was. And I actually feel like I failed on that tonight because, to be honest with you, I forgot that the beginning of this book, I read it long enough ago, that I forgot the beginning of it is basically just a rehashing of the history that leads up to what this book is. This book is called How the Hippies Saved Physics by David Kaiser. And it was a difficult book to read. It was actually recommended to me by a friend of mine who I used to work with, he caught me reading some... I think he might have caught me reading some of Feynman's lectures, and he basically said, "Oh, if you like that, you should read this." Now, I'm not sure that I agree with his interpretation, his creative leap, whatever you want to call it. The book is very different from Feynman's lectures or anything related to thus. What the anything related to them. That's what I was trying to say. But all of that being said, it actually isn't an uninteresting book. It is a little difficult to read. I didn't really feel it was put together well. However, it does go into some depth about a lot of the players who, during this time in the U.S. where we were very focused on making sure that physicists were doing the things that were applicable to the Cold War, there were these group of people who decided they didn't want to do that. So, it's interesting. You learn a few things, and what's more interesting than that is actually if you have any interest in physics or anything like that, you find yourself kind of maybe hearing about people that you've heard of later on in sort of the history of physics. And, for that matter, I kind of had this ongoing theory that I had a different way of phrasing it. God damn it. Do I have to drink if I say something wrong here? I'm not going to say no. Whatever. The point is, I found some things that I had been pondered by somebody else, and subsequently proven to be very, very wrong. So that was probably good. It's a good dose of reality, because I'm not a physicist. I'm a computer programmer. And the nights that I think I can have a discussion about physics tend to involve a decent amount of this. And there's probably some correlation there. Maybe even causation. I don't know. So let's see here. Anyway, so I'm going to do another regular session next week with one minor difference. It's not going to be here at home. I'm going to be somewhere else, so it might be a little bit more informal. But this is our 8th episode, so next will be 9th, and the week after that will be the 10th, and I have something kind of fun planned for the 10th. Well, it's fun for me. I don't know if it will be fun for anyone else, and frankly, I don't give a shit, because I'm not doing this for any of you. I'm doing this because I find this amusing. So, yeah. Anyway, again, How the Hippies Save Physics, David Kaiser. I'll make sure I put up the link when I push this up to YouTube. And thank you for joining tonight. Hopefully I'll see you guys next week. Take care.